Hello again, I'm Ruth and today I'm going to be talking to you about The Animals of Farthing Wood. The Animals of Farthing Wood was a series which ran between 1993 to 1995 on BBC and was based on the books by Colin Dann which were written between 1979 to 1994. When I was in infant school, they used to reel out this TV on stilts, which looked absolutely ancient, and we'd all be sitting there on the assembly hall with our legs crossed. What they thought would culture as 5-year-olds was Disney's film Dinosaur, the weird CGI one, Step Singing Tragedy, which really confused me, and The Animals of Farthing Wood, Series 1. I'd completely forgotten about The Animals of Farthing Wood up until uni, where I rediscovered it and watched the full 3 series and then got them on DVD for good measure because I loved them so much. I was so surprised. I was like, oh my goodness, it's this thing where the animals can talk and they're sort of going on this journey. And also, it is much better than Watership Down, I think. I tried to watch Watership Down because people said it was similar, and I think it's much more brutal. There's literally a bunny dictator telling bunnies to rip up other bunnies in order to instill fear into more bunnies. So I don't really want to watch it again. I think the religion was a really interesting idea, but I think it's just too human in a way because I think torturing animals for the sake of it is very sort of a human, nasty, evil thing to do. Whether in Animals of Farthing Wood, they only really kill each other because they're hungry or because they feel threatened about their territory. So I think it's a much softer way to introduce children to harsh topics like, dealing with conflict, annoying people, or natural disaster, and even death, because I think one of the criticisms is that it has a high death count. And you probably don't want to choose any particular favourite characters. If you just decide to like all the characters, then I'm sure some of them will make it through. But I think that's why I think The Animals of Farthing Wood is superior and deserves a reboot. So here we go. I'm going to start with Farthing Wood, The Adventure Begins, which I know is like starting with The Magician's Nephew in Narnia because it's the prequel that was written after the other books. But it wasn't actually adapted into the series because it was too dark. And I think that's a bit of a miss because it really shows you how they ended up in the mess that they're in at the start of The Animals of Farthing Wood. Because way back when, before Fox is born and when Badger is still young, otters are the best hunters around and they're gloating and taking all the good food, and it's really rubbing all the other animals, all the other predators the wrong way, especially Lean Vixen. So she gets together with other animals like the foxes and stoats, and they initiate biological warfare against the otters, but it doesn't work. The otters outsmart them, so then they go for all-out massacre and they kill lots of the otters, but 4 of them escape. And Sage Hedgehog, who is kind of like Pfeiffer from Watership Down, he can sort of see the future, he's a bit clairvoyant, predicts that the otters leaving Farthing Wood will mean the end of Farthing Wood. And no one listens to him, poor Sage Hedgehog. And then there's characters like Nervous Squirrel, who's also at meetings and that type of thing. But you follow the otters and you really start to root for Long Whiskers, who's now trying desperately to survive. She's thinking about how are we going to continue the otter line. There's only 2 guys. There's Slow Otter, who is really selfish and he really makes the journey difficult for them. And he actually has a very tragic death, which I think is part of the reason why this wasn't adapted. He gets killed on a train line and is literally beheaded. So that was a bit weird. And then she ends up with Lame Otter, and you really start to root for both of them and want them to survive. But of course, Sage Hedgehog has predicted the doom of the Farthing Wood, so you kind of know that it's not going to work out. And Stout Fox, who I'm pretty sure is supposed to be Fox's father, is starting to regret how they treated the otters and wants to kind of make up. And also they have a problem because the biological warfare has backfired on them, so they need to know from the otters how to cure it. So it gets to a head when humans are actually trying to find the otters in order to save Farthing Wood, because the otters are the reason why Farthing Wood is protected but of course it doesn't work out. So that's why diggers are able to start digging up Farthing Wood, because all the otters are gone. Farthing Wood is no longer protected. But happily, at the end, Sage Hedgehog does predict that there will be a new leader and there'll be some sort of safe haven with a white stag. I wonder where that is. And Fox is born at the end, or we're pretty sure it's Fox. It is heavily implied. So there's hope for the future, but overall, this book was very dark, and I think that's why it never entered into the series. So now we come to The Animals of Farthing Wood, which is set 5 years later after the adventure begins. Fox has grown up and Badger is quite elderly by this point. The book was originally meant to be a standalone book and is quite long. It's probably the only one that I would consider to be a novel. So it was so successful that he actually ended up writing more books. Colin Dan went on to write the other 6 books, but originally it was just this book about the perilous journey to White Deer Park. And the reason why they end up going on a journey to White Deer Park is because Fox and Badger decide to hold a meeting to decide what to do about the wood being destroyed. The pond's being filled up, so no one can drink anymore, and they need all the animals who have survived to get together and decide what to do. But they are not really sure what to do, to be honest, until Toad turns up at the meeting and says that he's just come from White Deer Park, this beautiful place where animals are protected. And because that's their only option at the moment, they decide to go ahead with that, have Toad as guide and Fox as leader. But of course, Fox being a predator, some of the prey are not really sure about him being in charge. So Badger says that his father knew about this oath, the oath of mutual protection, where they would swear not to eat each other whilst they're on the journey. So they all take the oath and then start off on the journey together. And the first place that they go is a human swimming pool in someone's back garden, where there's absolute mayhem and they all end up getting in the swimming pool and making a very loud noise with splashes everywhere, and a cat almost gets some of them. But they manage to get past that, having now had a drink because they were so thirsty. And they continue on going through fires, motorways, predators, hunts, and it's actually very episodic, so I can see why they thought it would make a really good animated series, because each of the different things that they have to deal with is very much its own individual story. And they're sort of slowly becoming like a family, constantly getting annoyed at each other. Fox is a really good character because he's so self-sacrificing. He's a really good person as a fox, but he's not 2D because he's constantly getting frustrated at them. He's really annoyed because the rabbits are always going, don't panic, don't panic, and the hedgehogs are always going, don't curl up, don't curl up. So it's really difficult to deal with all these prey who are constantly getting scared, which is very natural for them. But I think the way the prey are portrayed, they don't seem very intelligent. The only prey that seems at all intelligent is Hare, who's actually very critical of all the decisions the predators try to make, and Owl, who is a woman in this version. She basically wants to take over as leader, and she's quite annoyed that Fox has been chosen. And that's similar in the book. The boy version of Owl in the book also kind of was a bit annoyed that he hadn't been chosen because he felt he was very wise, but actually he was very pompous and a know-it-all, just like in the TV series. And Owl is voiced by the same person who voices Weasel in the TV series. Weasel in the TV series, her personality has changed a lot from the boy version of Weasel in the book, because the boy version often can be left in charge after Fox, after Badger. Weasel's quite sensible, so Weasel can help look after the other animals who are sort of scurrying around, panicking. But instead in this, Weasel is just very annoying. Like, she sings really badly when no one wants her to. She sings Pop Goes the Weasel, which is really interesting because it shows that the animals have an awareness of what humans think of them. And this is shown similarly in the book when Badger sings a song. They sort of know the songs that they've had made up by humans, sort of a culture around their own personal animal. Like Toad wants to sing Toad Goes A-Courting in the TV series. So I think that's a nice touch because it's similar to the book. Badger is kind of second in command. He's always got Fox's back, which is really good because all the prey are constantly turning against Fox because they're kind of scared of him. And sometimes he gets so annoyed that he threatens to eat them, which I can't really blame him for because he just needs them to do the sensible thing and get out of their own way. And Ada sort of similarly helps move the prey along by threatening to eat them, but actually she's kind of helping them. So she always acts like she doesn't care about the other animals, but really she is quite self-sacrificing in the same way, like when she saves Vixen. Vixen is Fox's mate who he meets when he is supposedly drowned. The rabbits have one of their don't panic moments when they're trying to cross the river, and Fox tries to save them, but they get on his back and he almost drowns. Badger tries to save him. They manage to save Badger, but Fox gets thrown down river and they think he's dead. Al's just like, oh well, he's dead, I can be leader now. But actually he's all right, and he tries to make his way back to them, meeting Vixen on the way, and she agrees to be his mate after he saves her from the hunt. So there's a sort of episode with the hunt where Fox has to save Vixen, and it's actually quite scary and is very much on the side of Fox's, being from their perspective. The whole series is very good at showing how humans seem from animals' perspectives with their littering and not really caring about the damage they do to wildlife. I really like the voices that they have in this series. I especially like Rupert Farley's voice, who plays Fox, and the way they have the different dialects from Britain really gives you a sense of that they're British wildlife and gives them individual personalities, the way they have their own phrases. So it works really well in the audio dramatization that they also did, where they had some of the voice actors come back and tell the story to Fox's cubs, which is a really good way to do it because in canon, the Fox's cubs are told what happened on the journey, because the journey becomes this kind of legend that everyone in White Deer Park knows. So it's a really good way to kind of portray it and put it on tape. And all of the episodes are really interesting, but I think the one that I liked most is when they go to the church and basically ruin someone's wedding because there's pandemonium. They don't know how to get out of the church. All these people have arrived as guests at the wedding, and so they're all running about, and Badger ends up having one of the ladies' hats on his head, and they run out of the church, making the bride kind of scream and start crying, and then they get lost from each other, and that is kind of the last thing that happens before they finally get to White Deer Park after not all of them have made it. You know, there's been a fire, there's been watery episodes, some of them have found it tricky to get over the roads. So it's been a very difficult journey, and I think it really fills up the whole of series 1 quite well, that they were able to fit the whole book into one series. At the end of the book, some of the guys basically go and get drunk. It's almost as if they're going down to the pub. They find some alcohol. And I'm glad that they didn't put that in the TV series, because I don't think that would have made sense and would have been a bit of a weird message to give to kids. But it's a very strange part of the book. At the end of the TV series, the white stag is there at White Deer Park, and he welcomes them, and all the animals cheer them because they've heard of their epic journey to White Deer Park. So it's really nice and a very good series, probably the best series. My sister had the tie-in graphic novel for series 2 of Animals of Farthing Wood, and that made me end up knowing the 3 storylines that they incorporated into the series very well, because the 3 following books were much shorter than the first book, so therefore they had to incorporate them and try and weave them together. But the one that I most like is the bitter winter that they're facing after their arrival at White Deer Park, and basically all the animals are starving, they're not sure they're going to make it, so Badger goes out and sees if he can find help. Instead he gets injured, and the warden finds him in the snow and takes him back to his house to heal. It's really interesting to have the character of the warden, because it's like Colin Dunn inserting himself into the books. In the first book there's mentioned a naturalist who they see in a field, and I think they didn't really have that in the first series, but they have him as the warden in the second series because he turns out to be in charge of White Deer Park. So it's really interesting to have this human character who I feel is basically Colin Dan himself, and you still only really get to see his legs because often you don't really even see the humans' faces in the series. It's very much from the animals' perspectives. The warden has a cat, and the cat is ginger in the book, but for some reason they've made him grey in the TV series. He's portrayed as all cats are in the entire series, which is a sort of 2D villain, very posh and conniving. Dogs are sort of shown to be stupid, but cats are kind of shown how they are in real life, which is having humans round their little finger. But the cat kind of makes friends with Badger. Badger tells Cat about their journey to White Deer Park and tries to initiate him into the oath. He actually gets Cat to go and find his friends, to find Mole specifically, and tell him that he's all right, because obviously the animals of Farthing Wood are worried about him. And he does find Mole. He goes out into the snow, complaining a lot, and he finds him and tells him what's wrong. But unfortunately, Kestrel sees this and thinks that Cat is attacking Mole, so she attacks Cat, and then Cat is injured and has to be taken back to Badger's set and is looked after there. But he is actually very annoyed and he sort of feels vindictively about it towards Kestrel. So later on, when he gets the chance, he attacks Kestrel, and you get to see Badger making a choice because Badger is actually becoming quite domesticated. He's starting to think that it's really nice to be in the warden's comfy, warm home where you're not starving, you're fed food all the time, which you don't have to work for. So he becomes a bit confused because he really is getting on by now, and he tells all the animals of Farthing Wood when he's released from the warden's home that they should come back with him and all live in the warden's home as domestic animals, which of course they think is crazy. And when Badger tries to do this by himself, Cat also thinks he's crazy, and the warden throws him out very kindly, but obviously he doesn't really want a Badger as a pet. So when Kestrel is attacked by Cat, because she shows up trying to convince Badger to come back to them, and Cat sees her and takes his chance, Badger actually attacks Cat and gets him off her. So he shows that his loyalties still lie with the animals of Farthing Wood, and the oath does mean something to him. And he sort of comes back to his right self and understands that they can't all live in the warden's cottage. The other storylines that happen in this book is that lots of the animals from Farthing Wood find mates or get lost. Toad does both. Toad has this sort of homing thing, which is a bit of a problem because it takes him back to Farthing Wood, which of course doesn't exist anymore. But on the way, a boy who's fishing captures him in a jar, and he sees that the boy has another toad in a jar who is a female toad, and suddenly he gets rather interested in her. Whistler is able to save him and take him in the jar to be taken out by the warden, which really confuses the warden, the fact that he's sort of being indicated to unjar this toad by another animal. But he does it anyway, and then Toad becomes mates with Paddock, who is the other toad, and doesn't want to go back to Farthing Wood anymore, thank goodness. They do try and incorporate the other two books into In the Grip of Winter, which takes up most of the start of series 2. I would say that Fox's Feud is the storyline that takes over most of series 2, and the Fox Cub Bold is sort of a subplot. So they integrate Fox's Feud by having it that when Fox and Vixen have actually gone out of White Deer Park because they're so desperate to get food, and they go to a chicken farm, they see two foxes getting shot and then take their chickens. This is actually shown to be Scarface's children in the TV series, and this is another reason why Scarface hates Fox. So he sort of becomes his nemesis and keeps blaming Fox for everything bad that happens, even though it's not really Fox's fault that they got shot, and he might as well have taken the chickens because he is also starving. And now we come to Fox's Feud, which is where spring has come and Fox has had 4 cubs with Vixen: Bold, Dreamer, Friendly and Charmer, all named after their biggest personality trait. and he just wants to settle down with his family really, but the other animals of Farthing Wood keep coming to him and saying that he's got to protect them again, this time from a fox called Scarface, who is blue and has one bad eye in the TV series, but in the books is covered in scars all over his face and is another red fox. And he does say that his lineage has been there since before the park was a reserve park. So it kind of makes sense for Lady Blue, his wife in the TV series, to kind of have this classist view of them, saying that because they're red, they're lower class than the blue foxes for some reason. I suppose blue blood. But basically, he's going around eating the prey of the animals of Farthing Wood, and obviously they want protection from fox again, so he can't just look after his family. He is now asked to be leader once again to the animals of Farthing Wood. And Weasel in particular has an interesting role, because before in series 1 she's just been really annoying and she's just gone about playing tricks on everyone and getting in everyone's way, and they all kind of tolerate her but don't really like her. In this series, Scarface tries to blackmail her into spying on Fox, and she actually shows her true worth because she won't do it. She keeps lying to Scarface even though Scarface will bite her arm and stuff like that. She finds a mate who himself says he's a coward. She says, "Why didn't you help me?" when she's being attacked by Scarface, and he says, "'Cause I'm a coward." And you're like, fair enough. But basically he's like, well, you should listen to Scarface and just do whatever he says. But because Weasel strongly does believe in the oath, she won't do it, and she actually is very brave and stands up to Scarface. So Scarface is just got a really bad case of keeping up with the Joneses. It's like he doesn't have a hobby. He's just obsessed with comparing himself to how Fox's family are doing, and because his cubs, like Bold for instance, are very brave and show promise, he kind of puts down Ranger, which makes Lady Blue really sad. He's very verbally abusive to her and wants to start a blood feud with Fox, so he kills Dreamer. And Fox doesn't really want to do this because it's not in his nature. Things get very Shakespearean. Ada decides that she's going to kill one of the blue foxes out of a misunderstanding, and unfortunately she doesn't get Scarface, which would have ended the blood feud. Instead she gets one of his relatives, so he now wants more blood, and he also bites off her tail, which means that she wants to lay in wait. She is now definitely set on a personal level on killing Scarface. Fox is going to have one-to-one combat with Scarface. Meanwhile, his daughter Dreamer, who has grown up, and so has Scarface's son Ranger, they meet and fall in love secretly. And in the TV series, it's Friendly who meets them and is very unfriendly towards Ranger, and basically tells him to back off because, you know, you're blue, she's red. And in the books, it's actually Bold who tries to come between them. But Fox and Scarface go head to head in combat, and Fox gets the upper hand, but he decides not to kill Scarface, and the warden comes and it breaks up anyway. So Fox sort of shows kind of like the 10th Doctor. He doesn't really have it in him to kill. And this is a shame because Scarface is still on the warpath. He still wants to kill the prey. So Fox has kind of not protected them by being merciful, by letting Scarface live. But fortunately for them, Ada has still not let it go. She wants to kill Scarface, so she lays in wait and sinks her fangs into him, and then he dies. He says that the blood feud will continue, but Ranger doesn't want to continue it. So he and Charmer end up together, and the animals in general try to integrate more with White Deer Park after Scarface's demise. Next we have the Fox Cub Bold, which is interpreted quite differently in Series 2 than it is in the book. In the book, it's quite a nice farewell that he has with his brother Friendly when he just decides that he wants a life of his own outside White Deer Park. But in the TV series, Bold has a very big argument with his father Fox and says this park isn't big enough for the both of us, because Fox is very angry that Bold got captured by the blue foxes, and then everyone was going to look for him and putting themselves in danger. Badger was even going to sacrifice himself for Bold, but Bold actually escaped himself and then is very annoyed at everyone for worrying about him so much. And I think in the TV series, he seems much more like he would be suited to be Scarface's son. He's all about retribution. He wants to deal with the conflict much as Scarface does, with violence, but Fox doesn't want to do that. And I think that Friendly is much more like Fox, although he's a bit of a goody two-shoes and he kind of sucks up to his father. So it's very much the story of the prodigal son in the TV series, of the stay-at-home son and then the son who goes out and it doesn't go very well for him. He hasn't really been taught how to live in the real world because Fox and Vixen never expected him to leave White Deer Park, so they never passed on all the skills that they learnt, knowing that humans are dangerous and that not all of them are like the Warden and will protect animals. I think that the Fox Cub Bold story is a really interesting exploration of celebrity child difficulties, because someone like Jaden Smith is going to go around and everyone's immediately going to think of Will Smith when they see and talk to him. And I think that Bold is experiencing the same thing. Fox has become such a legend from doing the journey and having the oath of mutual protection with the animals of Farthing Wood that I think Bold is really underneath his shadow and wants to get out of it, which is why he's differentiating in such a strong way by leaving the park. So he goes out and is hunting in the daylight. He thinks that the world is wonderful because he's never been outside of the park, and he ignores a crow when the crow tells him that he really shouldn't be doing that. And then he goes and finds somewhere that has loads of pheasants and he's enjoying that. And Shadow the badger tries to tell him that he shouldn't be doing that, and he ignores her as well, but he later finds her in a human snare and does save her. So you can see that the way he's been brought up with the oath of mutual protection, a fox helping a badger, he is still doing that, and he actually hurts his eye helping her, which makes her pledge her allegiance to him. So they're almost starting their own oath together. And it's very helpful that he's made friends like Shadow, because he also gets shot in the leg, and the crow will only help him when he tells the crow that Fox is his father, which I think is really sad. This story is very fatalistic because Bold is trying to get away from the shadow of Fox, but people will only help him when they know that Fox is his father, and they want in on the oath of mutual protection because they think it's such a fantastic thing that a predator will help them. So Shadow and rob her, which is what the crow is called by Bold. Bold names his friends because they don't have names before he meets them. They both help him, and he also meets a dog called Rollo when he is trying to woo his future mate Whisper, who thinks he's really old. It's quite embarrassing because he is thought to be quite old, looking so disabled, having his leg injured and his eye injured. But they do get together, and it's this insecurity the whole time for Bold, whether or not Whisper got with him because of his father for the family connection, where she can have her children grow up in White Deer Park, or whether it's because she actually liked Bold. And it is difficult to tell because when she gets pregnant, she is very strongly wanting them to go to White Deer Park. And it's only later that she realizes that he wasn't really strong enough to do this, being very disabled by this point. I think she actually regrets forcing him to go on the journey because also mentally it's very debilitating. The whole point was that he wanted to leave White Deer Park and make a life for himself and show that he didn't need Fox, and the whole time his friends are kind of only helping him because of the family connection. His mate is possibly only with him so that her children will grow up in White Deer Park. So it's very sad that he kind of had so much potential. Like in the book, he actually fought Scarface when Scarface was stalking them when they were kids. Like, he did this as a cub, but now he is very injured and he's having to go back to White Deer Park, which he never wanted to do. So it's quite sad and fatalistic, the whole story. And it is nice that his parents do get to see him one last time, and he sort of holds his own by refusing to actually enter White Deer Park again. So it's like the prodigal son story if the prodigal son decided to never step through the front door and stubbornly sat outside of it. But it's a really interesting story, and I really enjoyed this one. The Siege of White Deer Park is the other book which was deemed too dark to be adapted for the TV series. I'm less upset that this wasn't adapted because I don't find the story as engaging, but I'd still like to watch more Animal of Farthing Wood adaptations, so I am a bit disappointed there wasn't enough for a series 4. The Siege is by an animal unknown. All the animals in White Deer Park are fretting because there is an invisible assassin killing lots of animals and then disappearing, no one surviving to say what he looks like. Tawny Owl and Badger disagree about what the beast could be. Tawny Owl is of course wrong, Badger is correct, it is a large wild cat. Adder actually finds a clue with a paw print by the pond and shows Toad, which I think is really sweet because Adder and Toad have a closer relationship both in the book and in the TV series, being more similar animals. They go into hibernation, although Toad is very upset when Adder keeps eating his cousins, the frogs, in the TV series, which I think is quite funny. But the animals are trying to work out what to do about the beast once they work out what the beast actually is. And Friendly, who has gained a gang of young foxes, the fox family has increased quite a lot and lots of them look up to him. He goes and leads a gang of them to kind of have a standoff with the beast, but of course this is quite silly because even though they're big predators within the community of White Deer Park, they are very, very small meat compared to this large wild cat. So the large wild cat is able to play a game with them, and there's a bit that I really don't like. I remember reading this on the train and being very appalled. It's very similar to the live action version of The Jungle Book, where the wolf father is dropped from a great height and that's how he's killed. And I think it is a bit shocking and not necessary for kids, so I do get why they decided not to go with this. And basically, the only way they are able to get rid of him is a very dissatisfying ending for me, which is that the big cat finds a girlfriend and then goes off, and he prefers having a girlfriend to massacring animals, which is fair enough, but I think it would have been nice if the animals of Farthing would have banded together and worked out a clever way to get rid of this cat, rather than the problem just goes away itself. There are a couple of storylines that are borrowed from this book, which are put into some of the series, like for instance, Mossy being emotionally blackmailed into pretending to be his father, Molly, in order to appease Badger, because Badger has kind of got dementia at this point and is very confused. He's kind of refusing to understand that Molly is dead and instead is taking Mossy, his son, for his old friend. And then Mossy ends up becoming quite fond of Badger and sort of taking over the role that his father had in his life. So that's quite nice to have in series 2. And then in series 3, they introduce Sinuous, who is Adder's mate. And Sinuous is kind of a unisex name, so it doesn't really matter that they gender swap it. They don't have to change the name. And Sinuous is quite similar. They have a sort of cold flirtation and they're not really good at showing outwardly that they like each other. But in this book, Sinuous keeps giving sort of hints to try and help Adder, because Adder is obviously still part of the Farthing Wood group and Sinuous is sort of off on her own. And then eventually they get together at the end. So that is shown in series 3. But overall, I think it was just too bloody a book in order to make it okay for kids. I think they'd have had to take out a lot and it probably wouldn't be recognisable. So In the Path of the Storm and Battle for the Park are the two books that were adapted into series 3. And In the Path of the Storm is where Trey, the new white stag, is making everyone feel uncomfortable because he basically thinks that the white deer are better than everyone else. And I really like him in the series because he's one of those people who's unapologetically a jerk. Like, he just doesn't care. He will charge anyone who disagrees with him. The fox who comes up most against him is Plucky, And I think in series 3 they're really pushing to try and make Plucky the new leader to sort of take over Fox, but all his instances of heroism feel very forced. He's nothing like Fox really, because Fox has had to deal with actually difficult situations, whether Plucky is just in this very nice reserve, and he's never really known how difficult life can be, unlike Bold, for instance. So I don't really feel it with Plucky trying to take over from Fox, and Fox mostly during this series is sort of lying down, getting on in years and feeling quite grumpy. He says sorry to Vixen for becoming such an old grumpy fox, and I find it quite funny because I think he's always been grumpy, and that's what I like so much about him. The problem with Plucky is he's so idealistic. He seems very young and immature, and I think maybe Friendly, who in the book had a lot of young foxes who admired him, might have been a good new leader, or maybe even Ranger, to really show that it doesn't matter that he was a blue fox and that Scarface was his father, just like in Lion King 2. But they've decided to go with Plucky, and I don't think it really works because he's a totally new character. I do like that they've made Whisper his mum and that she's back, because I did really like her as a character. The other storyline that goes throughout this series as well from this book is that Owl has gone out and is trying to find a mate. In the TV series, there's this crow who takes quite a liking to Owl, and the crow sort of is a bit confused. It's almost like it doesn't really understand that it's a crow and Owl is an owl. And I genuinely thought that they were going to make them get together and it'd be quite sweet and sort of be another point, like the sort of blue fox and red fox getting together, but actually he does have a wife and he's just a bit sort of mentally ill. And then Owl does actually find a mate, like in the book, and they've changed the name to Hollow instead of Holly. And Hollow is very similar. He sort of makes up that he has this girlfriend, and this is to try and make Owl show her feelings and show that she actually likes him, because she's so sort of full of herself. She's not very good at admitting and being vulnerable. So it's quite nice because she goes all the way back to Farthing Wood, but it's also really sad because Farthing Wood is no more. It's just covered in houses. It's a residential area, and she actually lands on the last tree from Farthing Wood. And there's a lot going on in this book. There's a storm, and this makes the last tree sort of get blown over. And it's really sad because that is the last tree from Farthing Wood. So now Farthing Wood is completely destroyed. And the water is also polluted. So that's another sort of storyline that runs through it and is shown in the TV series. So instead of having Trey as the main villain of Series 3, they have the rats from Battle for the Park, and they have the leader, a sort of greyish-white rat called Bully, and he keeps saying, "Who am I?" And then the other rats have to go, "Bully, Bully, Bully." And it's as if he doesn't really know who he is, like he's got an insecurity and he needs them to reassure him of who he is. So he doesn't really seem that scary. He kind of uses his tail as a whip and isn't very nice to them, but at the same time it's kind of almost a pantomime villain. It's not half as scary as he actually is in the book, and they take away a lot of the deaths and the awful things that happen in the book, which is sort of reflected in the art style. The art style is much more cartoonish and less realistic, and I think it really lets down the sort of realistic nature and screenwriting that has made Animals of Farthing Wood so great in the first and second series. And also Weasel really loses her redemption arc because she goes off in a huff, just like Owl. She goes off with Measley and her two children, who are twins, and she treats her family awfully, especially her husband, and you just completely dislike her, where you learn to really love her in the series too. So I think it's a really odd thing to sort of reverse her whole redemption arc. The things I do like about this series is that they have Sinuous, who is a male adder who is Adder's mate, and he looks like he has a moustache and is a sort of beautiful kind of teal green colour. So I really like him, and it's really tragic how their sort of love story goes. And then the badgers, I really like that they bring back Shadow, and then they give her a Welsh mate called Harkle. And Mossy, who has learnt to love badgers because of having to pretend to be his father, immediately goes to them and is like, I love badgers, and then he kind of forces them to let him sit on them, just like he used to sit on Badger. And it's almost like he's doing to them what Badger did to him. And I like to think that in White Deer Park, if people went to the park, they'd be really confused by this sort of symbiotic relationship that has begun between moles and badgers, which you don't see anywhere else in England. But other than that, I think series 3 was just a real letdown in writing, and it's partly because they weren't willing to face the harsh realities that the books are. And I think it really would have helped to incorporate more of the stories from, say, The Siege of White Deer Park. But overall, I really love this whole series and would love to see new adaptations, maybe in 3D animation. They could try and live action it, I suppose, like Lion King. But I'd rather they didn't do that. I'd rather they stayed with a sort of new animation style.